event, I'd like to welcome you all to Making the Case for Same-Sex Marriage, a conversation between Julie Goodridge and Dean Katharine Bartlett. Thanks to all of you for joining us for this event. We're really thrilled to have Julie at the law school and to see the whole series on same-sex marriage at the law school come together. Big thanks are also due to Chris Farmer and Teresa Sakash for organizing this event and to the cafe for catering it. Before we get started, I'd like to give you all a brief summary of the case, Goodridge v. Department of Public Health, and to introduce our speakers. Their conversation will last for about 45 minutes approximately, and then we're going to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. And then in addition, Julie is also going to be speaking this afternoon at the Center for LGBT Life, which is by the Bryant Center under the Duke Card office at 4 o'clock, if anyone's interested in attending both events. Julie Goodridge is the president and founder of a Boston investment advisory firm with a background in education. She met her partner Hillary in 1985, and in 1995 they had a daughter, Annie, who's now 8. Though the couple always thought of themselves as married, they became acutely aware of their relationship's legal invisibility during Julie's difficult childbirth when Hillary was not allowed access to the hospital rooms. As Hillary put it, sadly, it's during moments of crisis, death, disability, economic hard times, that we see what a difference it is not to have marriage, end quote. Eventually, it was this recognition, along with their daughter's questioning about why they weren't married, that led them to seek a marriage license. In 2002, the Goodridges, along with 6 other same-sex couples living all across Massachusetts, took their paperwork and blood tests to their local town halls and applied for marriage licenses. When their applications were denied, gay and lesbian advocates and defenders, or GLAAD, filed suit against the denying agency, the Department of Public Health, and a landmark lawsuit was born. The plaintiffs accused the state of discrimination, claiming the ban on same-sex marriage violated the liberty and equality clauses of the Constitution. The trial court ruled against the plaintiffs in May of 2002, but the state's highest court, the Supreme Judicial Court, accepted direct appellate review of the case and eventually ruled in favor of the plaintiffs in November of 2003. The SJC ruled that the exclusion of same-sex couples from civil marriage is unconstitutional, failing both the rational basis test for both equal protection and due process. They said, quote, "We construe civil marriage to mean the voluntary union of 2 persons as spouses to the exclusion of all others. This reformulation redresses the plaintiff's constitutional injury and furthers the aim of marriage to promote stable, exclusive relationships." The state legislature then asked the SJC if a separate civil union structure for same-sex couples would pass constitutional muster. And the court responded in an advisory opinion asserting that anything less than equal access to civil marriage would be found unconstitutional. Recently, the state legislature voted to put a proposed constitutional amendment on the 2006 ballot that would ban gay marriage but establish civil unions for same-sex couples. Governor Mitt Romney has urged the state attorney general to ask the SJC for a stay on issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples until after the public vote on the amendment, but the attorney general has refused to do so. Barring any subsequent legal delays, same-sex couples will have access to Massachusetts marriage licenses on May 17, 2004, which is the scheduled date of the Goodridge wedding. The SJC ruling placed the Goodridges squarely at the center of the struggle for legal recognition of same-sex marriage. They've responded to the flood of attention with an abundant willingness to allow public scrutiny of their private family lives, making time in their schedules for press interviews, meetings with the governor, policymakers, activists, and thankfully for speaking at events like this. We couldn't have found a more fitting conversation partner for Julie than law school dean and A. Kenneth Pye professor of law, Katharine Bartlett. With a background in family law, contracts law, and extensive expertise on gender in the law, she's very familiar with the legal obstacles faced by families such as Julie's. She's written and lectured extensively on topics in family law, including child custody and non-traditional families. We're grateful for her enthusiasm for this event and for her willingness to lead the conversation. So without further ado, Julie Goodridge and Katharine Bartlett.
Thank you, and I want to thank the student organizers of this event. Obviously, so close to exam time, you managed to find a topic that is of considerable interest to members of this community. I appreciate you all being here today. Our conversation will be a personal conversation. We are not going to be discussing the legal aspects of the case specifically, but more the Goodridge's circumstances leading up to the lawsuit, the various decisions that needed to be made, and the impact on the family, and to give you a sense of the sort of human side of a very important piece of litigation. So if you came to hear about the legal issues, that was last week, and I'm sure part of subsequent programs to follow, but not today. So let me begin, Julie, just by having you tell the audience what you would like to know about them, about them to know about yourself personally, so where you grew up, your family circumstances, where you went to school, and so on.
First of all, Dean Bartlett and I just realized we grew up about 2 miles from each other. We had absolutely in a very rural part of Connecticut. So that was sort of a coincidence. I grew up in Connecticut. I went to public school for the majority of my life. I graduated from Branford High School in 1975 and was encouraged to go to a small sort of lousy state school, actually, by my guidance counselor. And fortunately, just didn't really follow his advice and went to an expensive sort of lousy school in Boston called Boston University. I was a philosophy major at Boston University because it was the best department at the school, and it was kind of an exciting department at the time, one that the guy who was running the university at the time, John Silber, had really worked hard to build up. And then I graduated from Boston University in 1979 with my degree in philosophy and decided to become a community organizer. And I worked for Acorn, and I was organizing poor people around socioeconomic justice issues in Philadelphia and in Tampa, Florida. And I had absolutely, we earned $4,000 a year. That was the annual income. So I quickly went to graduate school at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and got a master's degree in education. Came out, couldn't find a job, and needed to pay my student loans back. So I got a job as a trainee at Merrill Lynch. And Merrill Lynch was the only place that would have me, and they had a training program in Boston. And so I took the job and pretended that my community organizing experience with poor people had been similar to sales experience. And that's how I got the job. And the fact that I went to Harvard made them feel a lot better. So I met Hillary in 1985 at Harvard University talk on divestment. She was working at the Haymarket People's Fund, which was sort of a radical foundation. And when I met her, I thought she seemed like an angry radical, and she thought I looked like a young Republican. And at the time, that was not a compliment. It's certainly not a compliment in Massachusetts ever. I don't know how it would be seen here in North Carolina. But I have been estranged. Both my parents are deceased. I was one of 2 children. My brother is severely disabled and lives in a house by himself in Connecticut. And my parents would essentially, in their will, both stated that the reason that they didn't leave me any money and they left all the money to my brother, primarily because he needed it, but also because I was a lesbian. And I thought that was, I actually laughed when I heard that because I knew that wasn't the real reason, but it worked for them. So needless to say, I haven't had a lot of sort of familial support around being the person that I am in my life.
Talk to us now, if you would, about the particular circumstances of your family circumstances and the issues you were facing that led you ultimately to decide to become involved in this lawsuit.
Okay, well, first of all, let me say that when Hillary and I finally got together as a couple in 1987, she said something to me like, I've always thought about having children. And I said, we can't have children, we're lesbians, So that just tells you how wrong I was at that time. And I've just continued to be wrong about a lot of things ever since. But in we finally were able to, I was able to get pregnant with the help of a friend, and we had Annie on September 1st, 1995. She was born via cesarean section. It was a planned C-section. Hillary and I had done a lot of, because we're planners, we had done a lot of legal paperwork to try to prepare for her birth. We, had healthcare proxies, powers of attorney, wills, life insurance policies in case something happened to me or Hillary. So we would be able to keep our house. We owned a house jointly. We were sort of compulsively doing the only kinds of things we could do to protect our family. Annie was born with serious complications, resulting in a somewhat extended stay in the NICU at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Hillary was barred from seeing me in recovery because she was told that she needed to be my next of kin. And Hillary said, but I'm her partner, I have her health care proxy. She said, and the nurse with the clipboard said, immediate family only. When she had gone with Annie into the NICU originally, so she had been able to be with Annie. When she went back to the NICU after trying to get in to see me to tell me what had happened to Annie and how she was doing, she was told that she wasn't allowed into the NICU. But she said, but I'm Annie's mother. And she said, you can't be Annie's mother. Annie's mother just had a C-section. And she started to cry and said, please, ask anyone that's in there. I was in there before. And finally, she was able to talk her way back into the NICU. Meanwhile, of course, I'd had this child something like 5 hours before and had absolutely no idea what was going on. But I was kind of you're in a state after you give birth, and I wasn't really aware of time going by. Anyway, so finally she came back to the recovery room to try to talk to me, and she said, hi, and there was a different nurse there, and the nurse said, who are you? And she said, I'm Julie Goodridge, I'm Julie's sister. And she said, fine, you can come right in. And that was kind of the beginning. Subsequent, we just were being parents for 4 years. I mean, we didn't really think much about it. We live in a very open community, lots of gay and lesbian families, couples with children. Our daughter knows lots of other kids with 2 moms or 2 dads. But when she started at a very sort of prestigious private school just outside of Boston, we were thrown into the real world. And the second week of school, a first grader said to Annie, Annie had just turned 4, and she said, you have 2 moms, and that's not right. And we found out about that because Hillary was reading a story to Annie one night, and Annie sort of burst into tears, and it was a story about 2 dads, and she said, that's not okay. There can't be 2 dads, and then this sort of came out. After that, we sort of used any opportunity we could to talk to Annie about what was going on. With our family, how it might be different, but we were all a family. And Annie said, are you married to me? And I said, I wanted to say yes, but we weren't, so I couldn't. She wasn't asking, of course, are we married in the eyes of the law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? But, I answered as if she was asking that question, and I said, no, we're not. We had a commitment ceremony, and we love each other, and she went to sleep. And then within a year, Hillary and Annie were listening to some Beatles tunes and about love, and Hillary said, well, Annie, who do you know who love each other? Just typical conversation with your, 4 to 5-year-old. And Annie said, well, Nan and Dave. And she started listing all these people that we are good friends with who are married. And Hillary said, well, what about Mommy and Ma? And Annie said, well, you don't love each other. If you loved each other, you'd be married. And I cannot tell you. I mean, Hillary told me this that night, and that was it. And I think it was the next weekend, we went over to our friends Tracy and Jane, and they have 2 boys, and Annie was playing with them, and they said they'd been contacted by gay and lesbian advocates and defenders about potentially being plaintiffs in a lawsuit, because they were trying to find couples that were just like regular parents, to be plaintiffs. And
so you found out about this case from
friends.
somebody else who had already signed on to the lawsuit?
No,
Or?
for somebody who couldn't sign on. They couldn't sign on because they were both, one was a psychologist and the other one was a psychiatrist, and they felt that they would be taking too much personal risk if they signed on.
So what was your sense of whom they were looking for? Who was considered to be the ideal plaintiffs in this case?
I think Mary Bonato, who's absolutely brilliant, who you should really have come and speak here if you can, because she's really the brains behind the operation. But Mary Bonato is our lawyer. She had been very instrumental in the civil unions case in Vermont. She wanted, first of all, a number of plaintiff couples. She wanted 6. She ended up with 7. She wanted them to represent families from across Massachusetts. She picked people who were older, people who were younger, a couple who'd been together for 30 years and, basically wanted to protect each other in retirement, and a couple of guys who had adopted a baby from foster care, 12 years before. I mean, she really looked for people who the common, citizens of the Commonwealth could relate to.
Mm-hmm. And now, describe for me the first meeting you had with her and what was going through your mind in terms of involvement or non-involvement with this lawsuit.
Well, Hillary and I, we cover our eyes and leap. That's kind of how we are. So when we heard about this, because of all the stuff we'd been dealing with Annie in school, we just thought, this would be great. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. But we went in and we sat down with her for 2 hours and she quizzed us, and she wanted to know how we had handled stressful situations before. That was actually one of the top issues, because in fact it has been incredibly stressul, although
so she was trying to figure out whether you could handle.
Yeah, if we could handle it psychologically, if our relationship could handle it. At a fundraiser at the beginning of the lawsuit, I used to joke with Mary how she'd be handling our divorce if things didn't go well, and so, of course, we don't want to get divorced, and she didn't want us to be the plaintiffs that got divorced either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think, it sounds like your attorney was sensitive to this, but do you think, as you were deciding whether, as you say, to leap, that you fully appreciated what the significance of this would be in your lives personally, the negative as well as the positive?
No. I didn't have a clue. I think that one of the things about being a mom and being a family that is sort of accepted by your community is you feel like you're in a bubble. And, that bubble just started to burst a little bit when Annie went into sort of a regular, more mainstream school system. And the bubble continues, to burst as she gets older. And, you have I've been talking to her school about, kids not calling each other faggot on the playground, how that's just not okay. And, there's lots of things that we've had to do to kind of wake up to the reality of this situation.
Did you have anyone close to you advising you not to get involved in this lawsuit?
Well, we didn't ask anybody, frankly. I mean,
sometimes people volunteer that.
Yeah, but we sort of felt like it was a real personal decision. Just like we had a commitment ceremony a couple of months before Annie was born. It consisted of Hillary and I sitting in the weeds in our backyard, reciting poetry to each other and giving each other rings and sobbing. We were interrupted by our next door neighbor who wanted to borrow our hedge trimmers. We are not people. We're not very public in that way, and so we never really thought through kind of what it would all mean.
Actually, we have something else in common, thinking of our wedding, but we'll get to that some other time. Oh, I wish I could go into that. Talk to us now about what it was like being involved in this case. Did you have how connected were you with the actual stages of the litigation, from the complaint being filed to the various motions? Did you participate in these, or did you just pretty much sign your name, consenting to being represented, and just let somebody else take it from there?
We were interviewed by Mary, at the beginning in our 2-hour meeting about our story. And Mary took very careful notes and actually wrote up our story, mm-hmm. and then considered us along with 30 or 5 other couples or whatever that she was looking at. Mary was absolutely adamant that all of us needed to know what was significant about our stories and to have media training. And so our involvement consisted of us getting together one Sunday for 4 hours and talking about the case, talking about the existing laws in the state of Massachusetts, and understanding how our situation would have been different had we been married. So there was a lot of education around that. And then we had to come up, it was like we were in a workshop, in a classroom. We had to come up with our talking points, and we had to stick to them. And then this woman, Mary Breslauer, who is on the board of the Human Rights Campaign, who is just we call her Scary Mary. And she got a video camera and videotaped us in mock interviews.
Is this after or before you had
Before we
signed up?
filed,
So this was as part of the tryouts.
Well, no. We signed. We said we would do it, and then she had us all come to this introductory kind of thing before we filed, though.
To back up half a step. So when you were finally told that you had been picked, and in fact you were picked to be the lead.
We didn't know we were the lead plaintiffs. We didn't even know what that meant.
When you knew you had been picked,
yeah,
whatever that meant.
Yeah.
What was your emotion? Were you thinking, yeah, I made it, oh no, what have I gotten myself in for?
Well, the thing was that she'd been interviewing couples for a really long time, and we came in last, and it was just one of those.
Chronologically last.
Yeah. And so we just thought, she said, would you be interested if we said that, we wanted to have you do this? And we said, sure, And I think Mary called Hillary and said, well, we'd like you to participate in the case. And she said, great. Hillary called me at work. She said, do they want us to participate in the case? I said, okay, great. That was it. Had no clue.
Did you think this case was going to have the outcome it did? Did you have what was your sense of optimism about the likely outcome of the case?
Well, let me step back for a second. When we also got a subsequent call after our media training, and Mary, the two Marys, called us and said, we want you to be the lead plaintiffs in the case. And I said, all right, whatever. Hung up the phone. Hillary says, you know what that means? And I said, no. And Hillary's father's a lawyer. And she said, that means it's going to be Goodridge something. And I said, oh, that'll be kind of cool. That'll be kind of neat, The thing that's weird about it is we picked Goodridge as a common last name, before Annie was born, and so it didn't, I still think of myself as Julie Wendrick, or I had at that point, now I definitely feel I'm Julie Goodridge, but, so it was a little like an out-of-body experience. What was the question you asked?
Actually, I'm tempted to add, was Hillary's family fully supportive of her participation?
Hillary's father is a conservative Republican. He believes that Hillary Clinton is the Antichrist. Her brother is a lawyer. He's assistant district attorney in New York. Janine Pirro, is that her name? That some woman, in Westchester County, DA. Anyway, we didn't tell them. I don't even think we told Hillary's mother.
Interesting call.
Yeah, we didn't tell them. I don't think
Until?
I think we told them when we found out that there was going to be an article in the New York Times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what was their reaction?
He said, Hillary's mother said, I hope you wore something nice. And Hillary's father said, well, thanks for telling me, and that was it. And since then, he is amazing. I mean, George Bush comes out with a comment. He comes out with every legal argument why that was a completely ridiculous comment. He is one of our biggest supporters right now.
Good. Okay, the question was, what did you think your likelihood of success was?
Oh. I don't know. I don't. Things went kind of well in the lower court and the superior court when we first filed. And actually, that wasn't in 2002, that was in 2001. And the decision came out in 2002 in the lower court, ruling against us. I thought that the questions that the judge had asked had been very sort of nice questions. I mean, it didn't seem like there was anything that the Attorney General's office was coming up with that particularly held water, So I was kind of actually hopeful that we would, not knowing the legal ramifications, that we'd end up in court anyway. Everybody else in the higher court, everybody else wanted us to kind of lose at the lower court level on some bogus reason, I think. I didn't really understand all of that. When we got to the SJC level, I really felt like, we would go back and forth with winning and losing, winning and losing, winning and losing. Every day we felt something different. I knew that I didn't want a civil union type decision.
Did your attorney tell you from the beginning, this is going to be this is a legally tough case to make? Or was she very optimistic?
She felt incredibly confident. She felt like they didn't, because of the way I think that the reason, because she had been involved in the Vermont case, I think she felt like Massachusetts was the next place that this challenge needed to happen, because the way our Constitution is written, because we didn't have a DOMA legislation, and we didn't have an amendment that limited marriage to one man and one woman. And I think she felt politically. She was under a lot of pressure from gay groups, including lobbyists at the State House, to postpone this. Because at the same time, there had been a referendum. There were all these things that were going on. I mean, there was a referendum to try to limit marriage to one man and one woman. That it was a citizens referendum, and in a citizens referendum, you only have to get, if it became a vote, in order for it to become a vote to be an amendment to the Constitution, the legislature only had to have a 25% approval rating, as opposed to a legislator bringing a bill limiting marriage between a man and a woman to a constitutional convention that needs over 50% of the vote. So there were a lot of people who were really worried that we wouldn't get the support from the legislature and that there would be this huge backlash.
What was the most difficult thing for you personally about your involvement in this lawsuit?
The media attention, and trying to figure out how to balance the fact that we need to be nice to these people, and we need to let the people of Massachusetts know who we are, which is really what our job was, with feeling like we were really, really sick of having these people want us to cook a meal for them. I mean, it was really stressful to have people come in to the house. And sort of the quintessential moment for me was when the Lehrer News Hour came in July of 2003, because everybody thought the decision from the SJC was going to come down then. And the woman who was going to interview us was having a hot flash out on the porch, and I kept bringing her ice cubes. And Hillary was cooking dinner for Annie, because we needed to find, Annie was home, and we needed to find, it was a summer, evening, and we needed to find something for Annie to do so that she wouldn't be making a lot of noise and jumping rope, and we wouldn't have to keep saying, Annie, please go, blah, blah, blah. It's tough. I mean, she's 7. She was 7 at the time. And so we said, you can watch television. And we'll even let you have a TV dinner, which meant she was going to be sitting alone watching television, which for, her was great. She loved that. Well, I went in and I was, worried about being nice to this lady out on the porch having the hot flash. Hillary's cooking the pancakes for Hillary. And I walk in, I said, where's the cameraman? Because he wasn't in the kitchen. And he was taking pictures of Annie watching television. And I said, you know what? This is not okay. Because this is not what our family is about. Our family is not about our daughter sitting alone in a darkened room watching television, while the rest, we live our lives. And, you need to stop it right now, and under no circumstances are you allowed to use that footage. And I just, I became the limit setter from that point on. And basically what we've done is we've tried to contain travel. We don't travel together. We contain media attention so that we do it during our work hours, and we figure out when we're going to do our work, so that we try to have the least amount of impact on Annie.
In terms of media questioning, is there a particular question or set of questions that you find hardest to deal with, maybe most irritating, most insulting, most degrading, that really is the least pleasant part of the media relations?
The hardest part isn't really so much the questions that the reporters ask, although the polygamy question is always something that gets brought up. It was brought up the morning after our decision, and I had to sit on Fox News while this woman, Judy somebody or another, said something about, well, don't you think this will lead to polygamy? You know, and we're sitting in the satellite thing, and we're exhausted because it's the morning after the decision. And I said, well, Judith, you know, I don't really think this has anything to do with polygamy. I know I want to marry Hillary, and, you know, and she's only one person, you know. I mean, there's, you know, people, but seriously, we had to do a debate at the Nieman Fellows, for the Nieman Fellows at Harvard. And because there were two of us, and Mary Bonato couldn't come, so they got an ACLU attorney who's fabulous. They felt like they needed to have somebody besides Tony Perkins, who's head of the Family Research Council, and is, you know, really scary. Scary in that he really doesn't believe that there should be anything besides, you know, sort of Tony Perkins' model and his wife and his family. I mean, that is his model for life. And so they found someone else, and the person that and I was terrified about who they were going to find. And they found an African-American minister from California who they had flown in to talk to they'd flown in all these ministers to talk to the legislators to try to lobby on Beacon Hill. And he was particularly scary in that he was an ex-gay, and that was his thing, right? So, you know, I'm dealing with this person who is representing, there has been some backlash from the fundamentalist African-American community around whether or not this is a civil rights issue. So they felt it was important to have somebody that was African-American there, and the fact that he was an ex-gay was kind of an added bonus, you know. And I said to Hillary, good grief, you know, how are we supposed to talk to this guy? And what ended up happening was Tony Perkins was bringing up, you know, this is about changing the definition of marriage. This is going to destroy the institution of marriage. This is not about the personal lives. These are about policy issues. And Hillary and I think every gay couple's response needs to be, and it was for us, look, this is about our lives. We're talking about Julie and Hillary going to the city, you know, of Boston and saying, may I please have a marriage license because we would like to get married. And he even said to us, this, you know, not all gay couples are like Hillary and Julie. Most gay couples are only together for a maximum of 6 months and have, you know, sort of rampant sex throughout the land, you know. And seriously, he did not want to talk about personal stories. He only wants to talk about policy. And that's the only place these guys have gone. So they can bring up what I heard was brought up, you know, earlier at a talk you guys had here, or maybe earlier this week. No, last week. You know, you can bring up, you know, men and women fit together, and, you know, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. You know, well, you know, the fact is that God created all of us, and, you know, if there is a God, and, you know, and if we believe that, and we are who we are, and we deserve the same, you know, sort of equal treatment, and that under the law, and that's where I come down.
Is there any argument brought up on the other side by
Yep.
Tony Perkins and group that you have any sympathy for whatsoever? I mean, is there any sort of soft spot you feel in your own side's position?
No, but I really don't. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some days after doing something like this, where, you know, something like a Tony Perkins type thing, or, you know, we were on a town meeting on Channel 5, you know, with these incredibly hateful, I mean, people who are just saying horrible, horrible things about gay people, you know, and I'm sitting there listening to this. You know, you go home and you can't help but think in your weakest moment, you know, maybe we're crazy. You know, maybe we shouldn't have equal rights. But, you know, then, fortunately...
Did it surprise you that you would have that?
No, I guess, see, I have sort of this weird, I don't have a very strong religious upbringing. Hillary has a much stronger religious upbringing. She works for the Unitarian Universalist Association. She's gotten a ton of support from the Unitarian Universalist Association. And so for me, when all these sort of religious fundamentalist types were coming out with, you know, God hates gays and, you know, fags and all this stuff, you know, I was just kind of throwing it in the, oh yeah, religion. And it wasn't until, and I even found myself saying to Hillary, see, this is what's terrible about organized religion. But what ended up happening is we've ended up going to a lot of interfaith rallies that have been held because there's a huge amount of support among the religious community and the religious leaders in Boston. And we have gone to these rallies and have, I've actually found myself, now like wanting to be in those kinds of settings, in religious settings. So,
what do you see as your continuing role after Goodridge is finally completely over?
Well, you know what? I thought it was over on November 18th. I seriously did. I went home and I thought, well, that's it. It was nice, 15 minutes of fame or whatever, So, yesterday I talked to some gay and lesbian people and their allies in Charlotte. And when I went, when I was coming down here, I tried to prepare myself for, what rights do gays and lesbians even have in North Carolina? My family, my mother's family still lives in North Carolina, is from North Carolina. And, you don't have co-parent adoption. I guess in Durham you've got some sort of domestic something benefits, maybe. There are international or nationwide companies that have their, that are based here, so that there are people who work for Wachovia and Bank of America who have, domestic partner benefits.
We have one of our graduates here today who's actually an expert in this area. Maybe a little bit later, Sherry, you'll have a chance to participate in this.
But I just would say that I feel committed to, because I have my father's mother is from Lumberton, Mississippi. And so we have a speaking engagement that we're going to do in Alabama. And I feel like I am, sort of accepting responsibility for the South. I guess I feel like that because somebody's got to do it. And so I guess, maybe doing some speaking or, making people feel like, they're not, they may get fired from their job, but the world will not come to an end. And, trying to help people understand whether or not they can take a risk like we did, whether they're in a position to be able to do that.
I think there are probably some students in the room who see themselves someday being involved in, if not this very specific issue, law reform litigation of this type. I wondered if you had anything you wanted to share with them about your own relationship with your lawyer and what you felt you really appreciated about your lawyer, what maybe you felt wanting.
I've spoken to her about it, so I feel like I can speak to you. Mary Bonato is, I don't know if anybody could even hope to come close to being the kind of person and the brilliant kind of lawyer that she is. She is incredibly thorough, incredibly articulate, really warm, very compassionate. She gave birth to twin girls in, just when our case had started. She's a lesbian. She's amazing. She knew what the backlash would be about before we knew. And the only thing that I would hope for anybody else who has to go through this is that their lawyer not tell them about the backlash until it had already started. Because she was talking about the backlash, preparing for the legislative junk that could come down the pike on November 19th. And for me, that was too soon to think about it. I just wanted to feel like we'd won. So, and she feels, I think, I'm sure I'm the only one that said anything to her about it, because that's just, that's sort of how I am and how, I felt like I had that kind of access to her. But, I'm sure, and she feels very sad. She felt a little bit sad that she had, she was keeping up, really fired up. Her workload, our workload, has increased in the sense that we have more media exposure, but it's decreased in a way. Her workload has, increased 100-fold. And I think she was feeling the stress and the strain of that.
Any regrets?
The only thing I regret is that I wish that I'd known more about how to sort of deal with the media, even more than I knew about how to deal with the media early on, so that, There had never even been 1 second when I questioned, a cameraman taking pictures of my daughter. That's the only regret.
Let's open it up to the audience and take a few questions in the back.
For a lot of us hearing all the news coverage, first of all, I'm personally not really sure what the differences are, and why personally that wouldn't want versus actual marriage.
It's an excellent question. I just want you to know that no one in Massachusetts even knew what a civil union was before November 18th, really, because that's when they started talking about it. Civil unions are, even the civil union amendment to our Constitution, which was preliminarily, went through the first of a 3-phase process in terms of passing. I do not believe it will pass, but civil unions, in the best of all worlds, number one, are only available in Vermont and are only recognized in Vermont. They provide all the same benefits of marriage, the state benefits. They provide absolutely no federal benefits, and it would probably be decades before we would receive any federal benefits. And by federal benefits, I'm specifically thinking about when I die, Hillary won't be able to have my Social Security benefit. Marriage, in addition, if we go to Mississippi to see my relatives, we get in a car accident, nobody's going to care. I mean, they may not even care that we're married, frankly, because we're a same-sex couple, but they're sure not going to care about a civil union. And that's really the bottom line. The other thing that's relevant to that is that marriage, everybody knows what it is, and there's nothing different that we want than marriage provides. And it really would be a separate and allegedly, I think, a separate and unequal status.
A civil union can be anything that the legislature who is establishing a civil union says it is. The last point that you made, are you speaking really beyond that about the symbolic value to
Yes.
the couple? Yeah.
And even the SJC, I believe in both their opinion and in their reaffirmation of their opinion, talked about that. Talked about, everybody knows when you're married, you're a family. We are next of kin if we're married. We are not even next of kin in the world if we are civil unioned. Someone brought up, some legislator said, well, what if everybody could only get a civil union, and if you wanted to get married, you needed to go to a church? Well, as long as we could still file a joint tax return and everybody got a basis of civil union and had rights based on their civil union, not marriage, that would be okay. But that'll never happen. There's no reason for that to happen. Marriage works perfectly well the way it is, in my opinion.
There will, of course, be federal statutes, and there already are some that will have a federal definition of marriage.
Right.
So this won't
No, it's not a
necessarily
done
take
deal.
care of the. Yeah.
Since the ruling came out, has your family or any of the plaintiff's family been experienced, hate actions, hate speech, emails, letters, voicemails, coming up to you? And do you fear for your safety at all?
We received, just so you know, we received, I think it was 14 flower arrangements on November 19th, and thousands of emails and letters of support from people around the country. We received one email that some guy sent to Hillary at work because he figured out what her work email address was. And what was particularly notable was that he sent it from his work. And so Hillary just needed to do a quick Google search and found out that, in fact, he was president of the company. So we put an end to that right away. I have feared for Annie's safety. The head of her school is always saying, what else do we need to worry about? If I allow myself to, I can be completely flipped out about our safety, but I can't allow myself to feel that way because I can't live my life that way. The guys, and this is sort of interesting, there's a gender difference in terms of people's responses, the guys have all gotten death threats on their home answering machines.
What do you count? To what do you account that difference?
I think that the difference is that, all of the threats have come, from men, and men feel the most threatened by male homosexuality or something. And I think it's pretty hard to look at Hillary and I and our daughter Annie and think, evil thoughts. I mean, this guy from this company was able to think a couple evil thoughts, but, we're not terribly threatening people,
What has your daughter done the entire time?
Well, we're trying to figure that out. She's fine. She's a very outspoken person, as you can, she would either have to be a total wallflower or she'd have to be outspoken. She'd have to be either an overshadowed child, overshadowed by her parents, or not, and she's right in there. We've let her be interviewed twice, and not on once was because the guy was from Boston.com, and he was about 22 years old, and he was a surfer, like that's his hobby, and Annie really is into this whole concept of surfing. So I knew she really worked out a relationship with this guy, and he wanted to talk to her, so we let her, and she was kind of amazing. And she was interviewed also by another really young gay male journalist from a magazine in South Florida, and she said to him, it's not like we're from Mars or something, and then she said to the guy from Boston.com, she said, it's like, people with yellow hair and blue eyes shouldn't be allowed to use the bathroom, so sometimes I think, we try to keep her out of it, and now she's getting to this age where she sort of a little bit wants to be in it, but we're still very protective. So I think that we're on top of her sort of mental hygiene with all this, but we worry about, all the backlash. We do not bring her down to the State House when we speak at rallies. We bring her to interfaith rallies where she's going to listen to people talking about God, and she's going to listen to people talking about how much they love gay people and support us. We are not going to bring her to a place where some guy's holding up a sign that says God hates fags, or some other 8-year-old is holding up a sign that says God hates fags, because that has totally been going on. And we've been lucky to be able to shelter her.
My other question is going to be the civil rights issue. Do you recall, you said that being brought an ex-gay after marriage, do you recall the stronger point in the civil rights issue? And secondly, what's your take on civil rights, comparing civil rights with what's going on?
Okay. That has been more so in Boston a huge issue. In fact, a friend of ours is who Annie and his daughter sing in the Martin Luther King chorus together. They sing freedom songs around Boston. He is executive director of the Black Ministerial Alliance, which was one of the first groups to come out against gay marriage. He is a parent at her school and someone that I sit on a diversity committee with at her school. It's been very painful for us because we, all our lives have been standing up for, justice in whatever realm it's in. But I know that it is also true that both Hillary and I and every single one of the plaintiff couples can walk down the street and not be recognized for being gay or lesbian, and in that sense live, a life of protection. We could choose to live that life, and that is definitely not true for a person of color. So, on the other hand, when I found out that we had won our case, we were walking to, we were shaking, and we were walking to the Omni Parker house, and we were bombarded with a wall of photographers and camera people, and I was holding Hillary's hand. And I said to myself, oh my God, I might someday be able to walk down the street holding Hillary's hand and not worry about being abused. And I still can't kiss Hillary goodbye in the morning on the front porch, on the cheek, and not feel like at any moment somebody could make a comment that Annie would hear. So when I think about the kid from Laramie, Wyoming, whose name, thank God there haven't been those kinds of lynchings of people, because nobody should go through that, obviously. But it does exist, and it exists on kind of this sort of undercurrent level that I don't think a lot of people are exposed to in the world. And, when I was talking to the gay community in Charlotte, they were saying, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. I'm afraid. They're having a rally for marriage in front of the Gay and Lesbian Community Center in the parking lot. And I said to them, why don't you go down to town hall? Why are you doing it in your parking lot? And they said, because people won't come. They'll be too afraid that they'll be recognized and that they'll lose their jobs. So in that sense, I do feel that there are some really strong similarities.
Are all the plaintiffs in your case white?
No. We actually, but we have two interracial couples. And it's been, I think it's been hard for all of us that we don't have any, African American couples, Latino couples, or, we have people who are parts of those communities who are involved with other people who aren't of the same culture. It's been incredibly important. I think of David Wilson, who is one of the other co-plaintiffs, and he's an African American man, and he really speaks quite eloquently about, and he used to be married, and he speaks pretty eloquently about, the issues of interracial marriage and the parallels between gay marriage and interracial marriage.
I think we have time for one more question. Do we have any?
Oh, come on.
If the Massachusetts legislature should pass a law invalidating, or should pass an amendment invalidating the decision, have you considered the next step in the litigation process in order to get around that amendment?
I don't know if we could get around. I think that I don't know how that works. I mean, one of the amendments that was up for consideration was this really one that I thought was really scary. Like, I thought if they were going to pass something, they should pass the worst case scenario, because that way people will say, wait a second, that means all these people who got married in the last 2 years have to get divorced or have it annulled or something. There was an amendment that said that all gay marriages will turn into civil unions. And that kind of scared me, because, we already know it's unconstitutional, right? So, in Massachusetts. So, to amend the Constitution and then take away something that we fought for, it would feel really awful. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I really don't. The opinion polls, when we started this case in 2001, we had our first press conference, there was a teeny little article in the Boston Globe, like in the Metro section. There was not a big deal. And, now it's a big deal. The polls back then, when this came out, 30% of the people favored gay marriage, which is still pretty high. Not that many people would have favored interracial marriage in Alabama, So, now it's up to 47%, depending on how you ask the question. 47% right now, and we have an opportunity to get married unless the governor tries to pull something out of his hat, which we've pretty much determined that he can't do. He could do. We don't know what he's going to try to do. He could call out the National Guard. Seriously, and block our entrance to City Hall. This guy is. Our governor is a Mormon, and he's not even really from Massachusetts originally, and he's a really scary person. And we are not. These are the kinds of things that could happen. But I really believe we're going to be able to do this on May 17th, and everybody's going to be fine, and the state is not going to explode in flames, and so everything is going to. People are going to get used to the idea.
Well, Julie, I want to thank you for coming, and again, thank the students who organized this, and all of you for coming out, and thank you.
Thank you.